Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Andrea Vest, and I work in the Academic Advising Resource Center. I'm here tonight with a powerful team of individuals who are experts in understanding and helping us learn more about the second language requirement. So I will turn it over to them in just a moment. If you have questions tonight, please use the Q&A function, and your questions will either be addressed during the presentation or we'll hold time at the end to address any questions that we haven't already answered. So thank you again for joining us, and I will kick it off.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrea. I figured we'd just introduce ourselves first. So I am Dr. Michael Marsh Soloway, Director of the Global Studio, and I teach in the departments of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures, Latin American, Latino, and Iberian Studies, and Linguistics. And then next, Julie, would you like to introduce yourself first? Dr. Baker?
Hi everyone, I'm Julie Baker. I'm director of the French Intensive Language Program. I teach at all levels of the French curriculum for questions about the French program in general.
And I'm Ted Peebles, and like Julie, I direct a program, but mine would be the Spanish program, Spanish language, beginning intermediate sequence in the Department of Latin American and Iberian Studies, Latino and Iberian Studies, I should add.
Great. So let's get started. We're in good company here. I see that we've got many new incoming students, first year students primarily. And the way that we've structured this presentation, thanks to Julie's incredible, Dr. Baker's incredible design skills, we've pretty much framed this around the central question words. So the why, the what, the how, the who, these great interrogative pronouns from language study. So we are going to first start with the why. Why should you study a second language? And there are so many beautiful, colorful ways of expressing it. I mean, essentially, learning a new language is learning to think outside the box. You see the world through a new set of eyes. And we want you to be kind of creative risk takers. We want you to think outside of your comfort zone. And when you learn a new language, you are essentially developing new skills. You're learning how to imply meaning from context, and you're uncovering new ways of describing the rich and varied world around you, whether that be in oral or written registers. So, thinking about the four skills: reading, writing, speaking, listening. We are hoping that you will foster curious and tolerant attitudes that deepen understandings of other cultural perspectives and attitudes and ways of life, throughout the entire world. And ultimately, we're trying to instill this sense of global citizenship so that you will go on to lead purposeful lives centered around intellectual curiosity, integrity, empathy, and awareness. So, making sure that when we're all sharing our linguistic backgrounds and our curiosities, that we are, in embodying and acquiring new sensitivities that deepen our level of engagement with one another. So, how do we share ideas across international boundaries and borders? The world is incredibly interconnected, and we have to engage with it. So, the what? The what? You have a variety of choices to choose from. This is a beautiful shot of the back of Boatwright Library. And I'm pleased to report that we offer, let's see, I believe there are seven in languages, literatures, and cultures. There's Arabic, Chinese, French, German, Italian, Japanese, and Russian. And then there is sort of a catch-all program that's offered through the Global Studio called the Self-Directed Language Acquisition Program, where students have access to any language that is not formally offered in a program at U of R. So this could include Korean, Quechua, Indonesian, Turkish, Ukrainian, Urdu, Hebrew, Farsi. The list goes, there are about 7,000 languages on Earth, and the 13 or so that we support locally. There are other avenues for you to explore language study, even if there is not a formal program here. The one central asterisk or caveat to the self-directed program is that it is primarily intended for students who wish to go above and beyond the central second language proficiency requirement. So usually, in this case of the self-directed program, you are expected to have fulfilled the requirement before you continue on to one of these other languages. It's just important that you have a meta-linguistic foundation in one language to allow, that would allow you then to go off and investigate another language independently. And when I say independently, you're still working with native speakers, but you're kind of monitored and assessed and tasked on your own schedule. Um, there is also an intermittent ASL course that has been offered in the past. Unfortunately, our septuagenarian instructor Reba Poole retired recently from the linguistics track. I hope in the future that we can offer ASL, but for the time being, we do not offer ASL locally at University of Richmond. And then in La Lise, we offer Spanish and Portuguese. You'll hear from Professor Peebles about that in just a moment. And in classical studies, if you're interested in working with Professor Walt Stevenson or Dean Simpson, we offer Latin and Greek. And Greek there, of course, is ancient Greek. It's not the modern conversational Greek. It's mostly, those languages are mostly based in interpretive reading and writing. All right. So those are the rich and varied language programs that we offer at UR. Now, a few of you are probably wondering, what is proficiency and how is proficiency in any way related to fluency? So the word fluency is actually derived from the word fluid or fluence, fluent, basically that you can communicate without interruption or hesitancy. Proficiency is sort of like a measurement of what you can do relative to a variety of tasks. So a novice language learner is usually able to, convey messages on highly predictable topics. They're often divided, proficiency levels are often divided by text types. So novice learners are great with lists of words like menus. Intermediate learners are equipped to basically handle simple sentences and kind of tending towards that paragraph level discourse. Intermediate level is actually crucial because it's the point at which you start creating with the language. How do you internalize and personalize the language to communicate your own perspective to others? And then when you reach eventually that advanced stage, you are at paragraph level rhetoric, you are conversing and debating and sharing opinions, relating opinions. You are effectively kind of at the paragraph level discourse where you can have a conversation with almost any educated native speaker. And then superior is where you're effectively indistinguishable from a native speaker. Same thing with distinguish, where you are using the language skillfully. You may be working in the language. You are educated and articulate in the language, and you're able to converse. So the key differences are based on topics, based on levels of coherence, and ACTFL, which is the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages. They base this on sort of the levels of um, the skills and expectations that you would be, met with in the workplace or the environment at large. And here, of course, you've got this ladder. I always think this is a fun animation because you sort of start off with a pinhead, and as continue, your work up the proficiency scale, you're getting richer and richer in terms of what you're able to communicate and describe. Yeah, I like that model. That's great. And here, of course, is Actful. Actful, of course, sets the intermediate low benchmark as sort of it's your foundation. It's what you need to start communicating in sentences and creating. And this is again sort of the way in which every super level of novice, intermediate, advanced. There's sort of these three tiers of high, mid, low, and we are looking for you to reach the baseline. Again, the curriculum is sort of devised to help you engage the world not just through the lens of English, but we want you to see the world through some other linguistic output, and that can be anything. As you complete your language coursework, many of you are probably coming here with previous linguistic study already, which is fantastic. We'll talk about that in just a bit. But through your coursework or your prior studies, many UR students also earn what's called the Global Seal of Biliteracy. If you can demonstrate intermediate mid proficiency in each of the four skills, you can earn this fancy certificate that will then show up it can be linked to your LinkedIn profiles. And we have small ceremonies in the Global Studios to honor the hard work and dedication that students have put forward to really reach these levels. And you can see here that there are three levels. So the silver seal, you get functional fluency, working fluency, and then, of course, the highly coveted professional fluency. These are all quantitative metrics to relate to employers or graduate programs. that you are, pretty much fully competent in the language and can, adequately be expected to perform tasks related to these different proficiency levels. So here we go. We'll keep going. And the how. This is now where I will kick it over to my fantastic colleagues, Professors Baker and Peebles. So here we go.
Um, so Ted, did you want to say something about the bottom line for
Right. Well, what you see there, ASAP, language skills atrophy. And you have an investment if you've taken classes already in high school. And you should capitalize on that investment by getting your language requirement taken care of as soon as possible. Um, you won't lose your language entirely, but it's just going to make it more difficult for you. There'd be a shame to not capitalize on it. There's going to be a lot of people asking for your time. You're going to get a lot of advice from fellow students, from your potential major advisors, from other people in the next, coming months, especially during orientation. But I strongly encourage you during that week of orientation to stop by and see Dr. Holloway in the Global Studio, or just go online for French and Spanish. You can take it online and take the placement exam. See where you are. See where your investment is, because you may be further along than you think. As a proficiency requirement, the requirement is demonstrate proficiency, adequate proficiency in a language other than English. Some of you maybe have been speaking Spanish at home and have not had formal training. We have classes for that as well. But in order to find out who you are, taking the placement exam can give us a good clue about where you should place yourself. By the way, those of you who do have some Spanish experience from just but not formal, that's called heritage speakers, and we have special courses just for heritage speakers. What we don't want heritage speakers to do is to be sitting in a beginning Spanish class next to somebody who's never had the language before. So one of the things that we'll talk about that later about starting a language, which you can also do. But if you have an investment already in the language and you want to continue that language, I strongly, all of us, I think, agree that we strongly advise you get it done in the first 4 semesters.
Yeah, and people will tell you differently because they're not really in what we're doing, right? They don't really necessarily see maybe language as a skill. It's a skill like playing a sport. If you don't do your layups in basketball for a year or 2 years, then you're going to
Or
go
playing a
out.
musical
You might not
instrument.
hit it. You might not hit the shot. An instrument. You might not hit false notes. It really does. You probably heard maybe your parents or other people say, "Oh, I took French for 4 years in high school and can't speak a lick of it," and that's because it does atrophy. So really the first semester, the first year is really, really important to continue, especially if you're continuing so that you can continue where you are now instead of waiting 4 years and then maybe have to take other classes to get yourself back up to where you were at the beginning. So I'm going to go through how do you fulfill the second language requirement. So if you're starting a language from scratch, you maybe took, I don't know, maybe you took French in high school and you want to start in Spanish, or you want to start in Italian, you want to start in a Chinese. It's basically going through the 100 level sequence, the 200 level sequence, and then the requirement is completed. So every language besides French, Spanish, and Italian have a 101, 102 sequence that you can sign up for. And then you would continue on to the 201, 202 sequence. So it's a 4 semester sequence. French, Spanish, and Italian have what's called intensive. And I'll go into what intensive language is in a minute. It's a different format. And so those 3 languages are a little different. But again, it would be intensive 121, 221, and then completing the requirement. For French and Spanish in particular, in order to take the 121 level, you will have to come to Ted or myself for permission. And the reason why we do that is we don't want people with 4 years of high school sitting in the 101 level where you're learning hola and bonjour and those types of things, because we want everyone to make sure that they're beginners. And so we have kind of an interview process where we give approval that, okay, yes, you're a true beginner and you can take this intensive 121. So you won't be able to just register cold into Spanish 121 or French 121. I do want to talk about what is intensive. You might have seen this label. What does it mean? So, and the next slide, yeah. So French, Spanish, and Italian are intensive. And this means that the 101, 102 sequence is taught in one semester as 121, and the 201, 202 sequence is taught in one semester as 221. So instead of 4 semesters that you would have maybe in Japanese or German, instead of 4 semesters, it's 2. However, the intensive format means that it's more time on task in one semester. It doesn't mean that the grammar or the vocabulary is so intense. It's like an advanced vocabulary or grammar. It's learning the language from the beginning or intermediate level, but the course meets every day of the week. So most courses will meet maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or on Tuesday, Thursday for 1 unit of credit. The intensive courses meet 5 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and it's worth 2 units. So I really want everyone to remember that this is kind of like 2 classes. It's like having Professor A Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and oh, again, Professor A Tuesday, Thursday. The same professor, but it really is two units and 2 courses. So it takes up a lot more time. So if you have a 4 unit schedule, 2 of those units may be your Spanish 221 or a French 221. It might take up half your schedule. And that's okay because the time on task that's needed, you know, will be, you need to have that time. The other thing is, besides being 5 days a week with the professor, there are 2 what we call practice or oral lab sessions with student TAs, teaching assistants. Students who are majors and minors are hired and trained to be your teacher and to help you in smaller groups learn more speaking skills, review grammar and vocabulary, for French in particular, look at songs, look at videos, and be able to practice conversational skills in smaller groups. So the intensive format again is 2 semesters in one, more time on task, getting your language requirement done quicker, which is actually really great if you want to continue on with study abroad, majors, minors. You can get it done by the first year if you start from scratch, 121, 221, starting from scratch, you can have that done in your first year at U of R. But Spanish does have a level that's in between 121 and 221. This is the only language that has this. It's called 151. And I want Ted to kind of explain what 151 is and how that differs from 121 and 151.
Yeah, I mean, you'll have noticed that there's a department of languages, and then we have Latin American, Latino, and Iberian studies. Spanish is no longer considered a quote foreign language unquote, right? The United States is probably now the second largest Spanish speaking country on earth. And because of that, we have a lot of, we have a lot of Latino students. It's also a language that you see everywhere in the United States. And so we get more and more, for example, what I mentioned before, the heritage students. Heritage students have an interesting possibility here. Those assistant teachers that, or ATs as we call them, that Julie just mentioned. In our case, sometimes they are visiting international students from Peru or Spain or Venezuela, but oftentimes they can be Latino students who are fluent Spanish speakers from the United States, who we hire, and that could be you if you're one of those people who speak Spanish at home. We have a tryout system, and you can earn money for your skills. We consider it a valuable asset, your ability to speak. And these are oral practice sessions, so it's not about you having to teach grammar or anything. But if that's you, I need you to contact me because I'd be interested to tell you about our program. That said, what Julie was saying about how we stratify the Spanish program is that because there's we have more Spanish students than all the other languages put together. We offer, for example, in the intermediate program, 8 sections per semester, which is a lot. And then we have 4 sections of what's called Spanish 151. And it says Spanish for advanced beginners. But what Julie mentioned before, the beginning Spanish, the 121 course, which is intensive, the one that meets 5 days a week, that is, by invitation, you have to get permission to take that class. You have to be an absolute beginner. If you've had 2 years of Spanish, say in 8th and 9th grade, and haven't touched Spanish since, then you might qualify for starting over. But if you've had 2, 3, 4 years of Spanish and you say, I don't really feel confident about my Spanish skills. I really want to start over. You can take a beginning class, but it needs to be the Spanish for Advanced Beginner class. they both use the same book. I was explaining this to Julie yesterday. We were talking about that. I compare it to, one's an express train makes the major stops, of subjunctive, indicatives, the preterite imperfect. Whereas the true beginner class starts with days of the week, numbers, uno, dos, tres, cuatro, colors. It stops at every station, right? On the waist. And so if you've had enough Spanish to get that base to remember that basic stuff, you should really consider taking the 151 class. But again, the way to find out where you should be is to take that placement exam. It's really crucial in Spanish to do that because we have that distinction between 121 and 151. Now, the 151 class is only one unit, but it only meets 3 times a week instead of the 5, which is technically not true because it also has those 2 times a week oral labs that all of our classes have, right? In the intensive and non-intensive program in this case. So you have that option. They both lead to the same end, which is they both feed into the Spanish 221 intermediate course, which is the threshold course for COM2 for the second language requirement. So that's the difference between Spanish and other languages is we have this Spanish for advanced beginner class. So again, take the placement test, and if it tells you 151 instead of 121, great.
Yeah. And that just leads me into if you are coming in with some years of language and you're not starting from scratch, what is the procedure? The general rule is if you've had about 1 to 2 years of previous um, experience or background, you'd probably be good for the 100 level. But again, taking the placement test is important because maybe you had 2 really good years and you might be okay for 221. Maybe you're want to continue with Spanish and you have to figure out, am I 121, 151? I'm not really sure. So if you've had 1 to 2 years, you're welcome to take the placement test. But usually if it's like 1 year in ninth grade, that's probably beginning level. 0 years, obviously beginning level. But yeah, that's basically the general rule is 1 to 2 years. And again, for 121 French and 121 Spanish, you have to get permission from either Ted or myself to enter those two. Usually the guideline for entering the 221 level or the 201, 202, if it's a different language besides Spanish, French, and Italian, is about 3 to 4 years of high school. Usually people can self-place with 3 years. 4 years, I recommend taking a placement test because you might have had 4 years in an AP or something that you didn't take the test, the AP test, but you had an AP course, or you've had 4 really solid years. It's always good to see if you are ready for 221 or you actually are exempt or more advanced than 221. So taking the placement test is really not a risk. It basically just gives you a guideline. Another thing to remember also is if you've had 4 years of high school and you happen to test into 100 level, usually the years of high school is what is going to override the placement test. The placement test is just another assessment that we can use to kind of see where you are. And a lot of people do end up testing into 121, but really should be in the 221 level. And we know what scores and kind of what results kind of indicate that. So we are able to help you. So there's no real risk. I mean, it's not going to lower you usually based on high school. But it does help us kind of see, see kind of what course might be best for you. And after the 221 level for French, Italian, and Spanish, you have completed the second language requirement. After the 202 level for the other languages, you've completed the requirement. Now, if you have come in with test scores, are you exempt from all of these courses we're talking about, 100 and 200 level? Are you exempt? That's what we need to determine as well. If you have scored a 4 or a 5 on an AP exam in a language that's not Spanish, just 4 or 5, you can get 1 unit of credit and you are exempt from the language requirement. And you can continue at the 300 level at a higher level. Spanish, however, accepts 3 to 3, 4, and 5. So Ted, could you say something there?
Yeah, I mean it's actually the same as French in terms of the 4 and the 5 will get you a unit of credit, which is why the AP test is such a great deal. The 3 will get you exemption in Spanish. That is to say, but you won't get any credit. But you won't have to take you can go right into the 300 level.
Yeah, you don't have to take the 100 or 200 level 221. You just get exempt but you
Exempt
don't
without,
get a one
but
unit.
no credit.
Right,
Exactly.
4 and 5 gives you the unit.
Okay.
SAT 2, if you've taken that subject test and score a 630 or higher, that would also be an exemption. IB higher level, not low, not standard or lower level. IB higher level, 5 to 7, could also qualify. Or taking our placement test, there are certain guidelines. For the placement test, however, as it is online, that is just a screening tool for us to say, okay, this person may be exempt. They've scored for writing and reading and multiple choice grammar and vocabulary. They seem to be a more advanced. But for French, you have to take an oral exam with me for listening and speaking to confirm that. And in Spanish, you have a writing sample as well as a
As the interview, yeah.
interview,
We do
just
the same.
so that we're confirming that yes, this test did exempt you. And then finally, if you've ever had anything that's different, like a stamp 4S test, A levels, DELF, any other type of standardized test, then you would want to contact Dr. Marsalloway here on this call as well, to kind of get some of those results sent to us and look into that. Now, the great thing about exemption is you might think, oh, good, I'm all done. But think about all the time you put in to get an exemption. You've had AP, you've had years of language, maybe starting in middle school or elementary school. And we really do really want you to continue on with your language at the 300 level. Not only are the courses more interesting because the courses are content courses that are related to cultural studies, history, politics, linguistics, literature, even gastronomy, um, or languages, business French, languages for various professions. But a lot of them satisfy your web of inquiry or your general education requirements. For example, the written communication, the embodied communication, the literary studies can all be taken through the language that you've studied and not just like an English class for literary studies. You can take a French class or a Spanish class for literary studies. And we're going to get into a little bit of the 300 level at the end of this presentation. And what can you do beyond the language requirement in a minute? So I won't go into it too much. But we really do recommend, that investment you've put in is going on for majors, minors, study abroad, and getting some of your general education requirements done through our languages since you're already at a higher level.
Well said. So, if you are already proficient in a language other than English, like Professor Peebles mentioned, these could include the heritage speakers. You could have maybe been educated in a system where the language of education, the language of instruction was something other than English. You would be welcome to request exemption, and some of those other scores, those other exams, the DELF, the Indian General Certificate of Education, the A levels, all of those scores can come into play to evaluate your linguistic ability. And you can request, exemption from the language requirement based on your previous linguistic background, or maybe you weren't educated formally in it, but you speak it at home. There's a website here, llc.richmond.edu/academic/com2 exemptions. Eventually, we're still trying to call this old acronym COM2. For the time being, we're going to be using SLP, Second Language Proficiency, as sort of the new parlance to describe this requirement. So if you have studied or have proficiency in a language other than English already from your language background and maybe your upbringing, by all means, please feel free to complete that form.
And oh,
And
can you go back one minute for
yeah, sure,
Ted?
go ahead,
Ted, do
Julie.
you want to say anything more about those who speak Spanish fluently?
Yeah, I mean the neat thing, there's a lot of ways to capitalize on your Spanish skills. If that's you, I've mentioned that you could work as a AT, but one of our most popular courses at the 300 level for students who are as a first course in Spanish is our Spanish in the community class. And this is for pre-business students, pre-law students, pre-medicine students. You go out into the community and you work at Crossover Ministries Clinic, for example, translating between doctors and patients. You work at student teacher parent conferences, translating for between a teacher and Latino parents who don't speak the language. I mean, their kids are fluent, but they're not. All kinds of opportunities to professionalize your Spanish while you are. The other thing that can happen is if you have the language skills that are necessary, you can apply for. We've had students do summer Fulbright teacher certification, where you get a Fulbright grant, where they send you abroad. and it's paid for. I mean, there's just lots of opportunities um, for and a lot of good reasons for keeping the investment that Julie mentioned before that you've come here with. If you have that level of proficiency, it's a shame not to capitalize on it because it can help you in other areas that you may end up studying later.
That's what we're going to talk about in a minute. But also, just if you have grown up or studied in a language other than English, so you have already probably fulfilled the requirement. And so if you have any doubt, just contact Dr. Marsh Soloway. He'll lead you to the right person to talk to. But we don't need you to go through the 121, 221 process if you already are fluent at home with another language as well. So.
Right. There's a question in the chat. I got to take that very briefly on the subject. If you come with language, but your language skills, especially in Spanish, for example, if you haven't even had formal Spanish, we have classes that are specifically designed for students who speak Spanish at home, but who haven't had any formal training in the language. And that we have a specialist, David Giancastro. Dr. Giancastro is a second language acquisition specialist who specializes in heritage speakers, Spanish for heritage speakers. So there's lots of nice shortcuts for those people to professionalize their Spanish. There's also a Latino students organization on campus that for those folks who get together, and lots of opportunities again for folks who want to professionalize their Spanish. I'm not saying that there's a difference between the Spanish that you might speak with abuela at home that you've been speaking to abuela your whole life, right? But it may not be what you're going to say in a job interview. Well, that's why there's all kinds of Spanish courses for precisely designed for people who are in that situation.
And so Ted, I mean, Ted might be a good point of contact from this webinar to get started that conversation if you are a heritage speaker of Spanish.
Oh, yeah, because Professor Giancastro wants to meet you. I
Yeah,
can tell you that
yeah,
right
but Ted, you can email
now.
Ted.
I'll give you his email address.
Yeah, email Ted Peebles and he can get you in contact.
I will steer you to the right people.
Yeah.
They're in demand.
I also want to stress, don't hesitate to embark on a new adventure also. I have, I was one of those students who took a few years of Spanish back in middle school, and I don't remember much of it. And so I'm looking forward to taking 121 with Professor Corrado Corradini, and I hope eventually to take the Spanish in the community course with Professor Vasquez, just because I've seen how excited and engaged and enriched the students are doing these activities in the community, whether it's working with the Archive of Richmond or with Ministry Health. And I mean, they're just doing such cool things you can't help but want to be involved.
But
Yeah,
Michael, how
Yeah.
many languages do you speak, Michael?
Yeah, so my degree is in Russian. I dabble in German and French and a little bit of Latin. So it's
yeah, and
again, don't
yeah,
hesitate to
No.
shy away from it.
nothing is forcing anybody to continue the language
Yeah,
from high school. I mean, it's good
yeah,
because you've already gotten that investment, but you can always start anew. But Michael, I think you're going to talk about next how to take a placement test. Like, how do you sign up?
exactly.
Yeah.
So the who and the when. So again, we offer placement testing in Chinese, French, German, Russian, and Spanish. And there's a simple form. Essentially, it's this website here, and I can put this in the chat. But effectively, you fill this out, and usually within about 12 hours, I provide you with instructions via email to complete the test online. We ask that you complete the test on your honor. Don't have anyone else they're helping you. It's supposed to be a low stakes assessment measurement of just kind of giving you guidance. It's supposed to calibrate the advice that we give you to say, this we think this course should be available, should be appropriate to your level based on what
Get
you
a
can do.
snapshot of where
Yeah,
you are.
it's a snapshot.
Right.
It is like, Professor Peebles and Professor Baker have stated, it is low stakes. It should not be a painful experience. Again, it is just to help us calibrate the enrollment guidance that we provide to you relative, to your experience, your linguistic background, what you're capable of doing with the language. And again, we stress that you do this as soon as possible, just to help help you plan out your fall enrollment plan.
Right. Yeah.
To
Like
get
a
your
lot of people
courses
are
enrolled.
taking the placement test like late August after they've
Yeah,
already registered for classes, and then they have switching around, and it's kind of
it's a
chaotic. So
nightmare.
get your placement test done this summer. And also, if you've never taken a language, you don't have to take a placement test, that's for sure. And if you've already exempted with AP scores, SAT scores, you don't have to take a placement test. So that's just. But if you don't know and you had 3 years, you just want to see, it's not gonna penalize you based on your years of high school.
That's right.
It's free. It only takes a few minutes.
Yeah. And don't use it like, and one thing is no assistance, because we want your raw like proficiency.
Right. We want
To know where you are.
an honest picture.
And,
Right.
and plus it's a test, it's a university test, so it is based on our U of our honor code as well. So I'm gonna finish tonight with then what do we do after you get through the 221, the 200 levels, you've got your second language proficiency. What do we write? Yes, of course, majors and minors. But one thing we want to say is that if you are exempted from an AP score or some test score, you could start at the 300 level and begin a major and minor the first semester. And if you have 8 semesters or 4 years, 8 semesters at U of R, most of our majors are 9.5 units. Our minors are 5 to 6 units. That means in 8 semesters, you would just have to take one class a semester to get to a full major or minor, and possibly study abroad. A lot of people get 4 classes from a study abroad semester for their majors and minors in language. So it's really, really easy. If you have exempted, you have an AP score, or you're just going to take 221 in the fall of your first year, and you're done with your second language proficiency. While in your spring of your first year, gosh, you could start with a major and minor and get it done with just one class per semester, which is really incredible. We offer research opportunities with faculty honors. We have a French honors, for instance, to write and to present research papers. We have professional opportunities that Ted was talking a little bit about, community work, internships that students can do abroad, and also, as you see in the pictures, we have a lot of social activities and affinity groups. We have a French club, a Slavic club. Ted, do you have any other things in La Lise that
Well,
you
yeah,
want
then there's a Latino Students Organization as well. And then we also have majors and minors that get together. And again, a lot of it is through study abroad as well. So I just got back from Spain over the weekend, as a matter of fact. And there's a special program, for example, for athletes to take Spanish in Spain. So they have a training regimen. They go around to different gyms all around Sevilla in Spain, and get their training done for their coaches while they're getting their Com2 requirement done. So there's lots of opportunities, and especially for going abroad, right? This is where this is what changed my life. I went abroad as a third-year student for a semester, and I stayed for three.
to? Mhm.
And,
And,
and
yeah,
that's
and
what happened.
we have a German club where they do game nights. We have
Oh,
Italian
right.
clubs. So there's like all sorts of different things. Our departments, in particular, and the next slide, I think, really want to inspire students to explore languages, literatures, and cultures, to pair it with other disciplines you might be studying, interdisciplinary work. So you're working with business, or you're working with political science, or you're in healthcare studies. We want to equip you with tools for being able to do research with others internationally, being able to read articles in a different language and have that help to foster your own research. We want to.
Did you mention CLAC before?
Yeah, we have courses where you can do maybe a quarter unit or a half unit by reading and speaking in the language. We can do that as well. We want to encourage research with faculty. We want to foster community engagement, collaborative work across cultures, and we mentioned guide students in study abroad. But also at the very end is contributing to using the language with other disciplines in the humanities, but even in the sciences, and create those learning environments that make you a global citizen, that celebrate linguistic and cultural diversity. So we're talking about the language requirement here as if it's some box to check off, but I hope that, kind of listening tonight, it gives you a sense that this is not just like a roadside stop, and then you're like, okay, I'm done. I got my Doritos and my chips, and like I'm ready to go on.
Yeah.
But it's a voyage. It's an adventure, and it's
Not
something.
just a hoop to jump through. That's
Yeah,
exactly
yeah.
right.
It's something that can be a lifelong adventure. So, and the last slide says it all. Languages take you further. languages take you further professionally. It takes you further personally. It takes you further just mentally as a person that's just finding opportunity as well. So we would love to have your questions on the chat. We have a couple minutes, and we're here to answer.
Well said.
Maria has asked about, Spanish at home. I did type one answer to you directly. I'm not sure if you got it. But again, I hope I answered that before with the Spanish for Heritage Speakers classes. One of them is called the Spanish Writing Workshop, for example. The writing workshop is to formalize the written skills, which are often the ones that are it's funny because people say that the hard part about learning a language is always speaking, and it is for most people. But for people who speak it at home, that's not the problem at all. The problem is they've never had any formal training in the reading and writing of it. So the Spanish Writing Workshop is one of the first classes that we get for a lot of heritage speakers who want to professionalize their Spanish, for example. And in one semester, 2 semesters, that can be a multi-semester thing. But that workshop would be the first. The Spanish writing workshop would be a prerequisite to other classes. Typically, heritage speakers end up doing the Spanish in the community classes, for example, which have myriad opportunities related to many different majors, and using your Spanish skills in the community.
Also, the clubs and enrollment. So there's an entire Center for Student Involvement. It's an organization in the THC, and so there's Korean, so the CASA, Korean American Student Alliance. There's an Asian and Pacific Islanders group. There's a Bhangra Indian dance group. I mean, there's so many different activities there, and stressing that interdisciplinarity, I think, is going to be a really exciting way to promote further engagement with the language and the culture. So by all means, I hope you explore some of those resources and opportunities. And Julie, I'm not seeing any other questions. I'm not sure if you are.
And if Andrea could come on and kind of say where this PowerPoint will be available, if you want to
Yeah.
look back on the procedures of or the link for the placement testing.
Sure. I am going to email this presentation to everyone who attended tonight, and then the video recording from tonight will be added to our new Spiders checklist in the summer webinars where you registered to attend. There is one final question down there. I don't know if you saw it from Leonardo. They ask, where would a student be placed if they already know how to speak a language but don't know how to read or write in it?
Right. So this is where the placement test comes in because your ability in terms of the placement test is actually based on multiple choice questions about mostly about comprehension, right? To place out of Spanish and to become exempt using that instrument, it requires you to come in to have an interview, an oral interview, and actually to produce some writing. And if we see that's where you need work, we put you at the appropriate level. If you're close enough, that is to say that you have enough skills that you would not benefit from taking the intermediate Spanish course, then we would send you to the Spanish for Heritage Speakers class, right, with the writing workshop to professionalize your Spanish. But what we don't want is for people who already have demonstrably proficient Spanish skills in a class next to people who are learning for the first time, because that doesn't do anybody any good. In fact, it's counterproductive for all of
And
them.
Michael, could you talk about if it's not Spanish, like if it's,
Yep.
another language?
If it is not Spanish, you can. I put this in the chat, but it seems to have only gone to hosts and panelists. But it's the SLP exemption link. So essentially, here I would recommend Leonardo that you fill out this form, and there are some basic questions about how much, what do you do in the language? Did you go to school in the language? And effectively, some more information would help to advise, what your prospective next steps could look like. Generally speaking, though, because we evaluate proficiency across the four skills, if you cannot read or write in the language that maybe you grew up speaking at home, you may want to consider a different language. I don't think that would be sufficient just to complete the requirement on its own, But again, I would encourage you to fill out that form and let's have a conversation about it. Let's see what what your exposure and your level of capability actually would be based on some of these frameworks. All right.
All right, last call for questions.
Yeah.
All right, seeing none, thank you again for joining us tonight. Again, this recording will be posted in the next 2 days. They usually upload quite quickly, so please check back and don't hesitate to ask any one of us questions
That's right.
if you have additional questions along the way. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank
Lucy,
you.
Andrea, thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. Enjoy your summer.
Good night, all.